It was the writer Neil Gaiman who said that sometimes it's that little bit of madness we have that keeps us sane. And we can really see this in the life story of one of my heroes, Joshua Norton I, who from 1859 until 1880 was Emperor of America and Protector of Mexico. Norton was born in England, raised up in South Africa, and he moved to San Francisco in the 1840s. He inherited a lot of family money and invested it well, becoming one of the wealthiest men in the entire area. But tragedy struck around 1857 when he invested all of his money into a big shipment of rice from Peru. His boat came into the harbour and they discovered that it had all gone bad and mouldy on the journey. Norton's fortune was wiped out overnight. And some would say he also lost his mind. What we know is that Norton disappeared from view for about 2 years until in 1859 he walked into a major newspaper office in San Francisco dressed in an old army outfit with shiny brass buttons and a beaver hat with peacock feathers, and he placed down on the desk a written proclamation which read, "I, Joshua Norton, at the request and desire of a great majority of the citizens of these United States, do hereby declare myself Emperor of America and Protector of Mexico." Now, your average newspaper editor today would probably go and push the little red button under his desk to call for security. But this particular editor had all the native instincts of a journalist. He published it. And thus began Joshua Norton's glorious 21-year reign. Now you might ask yourself, what does an emperor do? Well, Norton would walk the streets of his empire accompanied by his two most faithful subjects, street dogs, by the names of Lazarus and Bummer. He would inspect the state of the sidewalks, the cable cars, and on occasion even the uniform of police officers passing by, a behaviour which eventually got himself arrested under suspicion of insanity. But he hadn't been held in jail long, only a few days, before huge crowds began to gather outside, angrily demanding the return of their emperor. They'd been whipped up by some scathing newspaper editorials. And Norton was released. And to his credit, the chief of police, an O'Reilly, was said to have said, "Well, to my knowledge, Mr. Norton has neither killed no one, robbed no one, nor invaded no country," which is a great deal more than can be said for many in his line. Norton was magnanimous enough to award the police officer who had arrested him a full imperial pardon. And thereafter, every time the police passed him on the street, they all gave him a royal salute. Now you might wonder, why was Norton quite so popular? And one answer is that he was just good for business. That original newspaper report had been syndicated through the country, and now some tourists turned up looking for that little old emperor of theirs. And if he was in a good mood, he'd let them pay their taxes, 50 cents or so, and they'd get a nice official-looking receipt to take back home and show the folks. Norton was given a room in the Metropolitan Hotel, given front row seats in all the concerts in town. He was allowed to eat for free in many restaurants, as long as he gave them permission to put a brass plaque outside that read, "By order of His Imperial Majesty Norton I." And for his day-to-day expenses, a local printer helped him make the Norton dollar, a currency which was soon accepted all the way across San Francisco. But I think Norton was loved for two reasons in particular, two events. The first happened in the 1860s when there was a great deal of mass hysteria and racism surrounding Chinese immigration to the west coast of America. Popular legend had it that Chinamen liked to lure innocent, white, Christian women down to their opium dens, where they would drug them and have their evil oriental way with them. And so crowds would form in the main squares, whipping themselves up into a frenzy, drinking rye whiskey, until they would go and beat up anybody who looked even remotely Asian and burn down Chinese laundries and shops. Well, it's said that Norton came along one day and saw one such mob, and he went and stood between them and their Chinese targets, bowed his head, and began to repeat the Lord Prayer over and over. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Until eventually the crowd just lost their fighting spirit and drifted off home, feeling rather ashamed of themselves. The second event was a law that Norton tried to pass, one of many actually, but one that many people in San Francisco wished was still honoured today. Now, San Francisco, it's a bit of a mouthful, and sometimes people try to shorten it. You might hear San Fran. You might even see written sometimes SF. But there's one name you must never, ever use. Norton's law read like this. Whomever, after fair and proper warning, shall be heard to utter the abominable word Frisco, shall be held guilty of a high misdemeanor and ordered to pay $25 in fines. But beyond being a loving, eccentric figure, Norton was also something of a visionary. It was he who first had the idea of a bridge to cross the San Francisco Bay, something that actually came into being some 60 years later. And he also helped popularize the idea of a League of Nations, a place where countries could go to peacefully resolve their disputes. Again, something that was actually created after the First World War. Joshua Norton was walking the streets of his empire in 1880, one night, when he collapsed. A policeman found him and called for a carriage, but by the time it arrived, it was too late. The next day, the newspaper headlines read, "The King is dead." And in an editorial just dripping with sadness, they wrote, "Yesterday evening, on a moonless night, Joshua Norton I, by grace of God, Emperor of America and Protector of Mexico, departed this life." He was found with not a penny on him, and he would have been buried in a cemetery for paupers, but a local businessmen's association offered to pay the costs of a funeral to do him justice. And it was as well they did, because in the event some 30,000 people came out, from priests to pickpockets, as the newspapers had it, all come out to pay respect to the one and only Emperor of America, Joshua Norton I. A man whose little bit of madness had helped keep him sane.